Some highways stretch out so far into the darkness that they feel like they don't end. The kind where the only company you have are the stars, the hum of your engine, and the eerie quiet of the night. For me, those kinds of drives used to be peaceful. That was before we saw the lights. It was the summer after graduation. 4 of us, me, my best friend Ryan, his younger brother Caleb, and Caleb's girlfriend Mia, were on a road trip to celebrate. We'd packed the car with snacks, camping gear, and enough music to last us the entire drive. Our plan was simple: drive through the mountains, find a good spot to camp, and spend a few nights under the stars. It was supposed to be fun. It wasn't. We left late in the afternoon, which meant we were driving well into the night. The first few hours flew by. We sang along to the radio, cracked jokes, and shared plans for what we'd do once we got to the campsite. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the mood shifted. The road twisted and turned through dense forest, the tall trees blocking out what little moonlight there was. The only thing keeping the darkness at bay was the car's headlights, and even they felt too weak to pierce through the shadows. By the time we reached the open stretch of highway leading up the mountain, we were all starting to feel the weight of the drive. That's when Mia noticed them. "Do you see that?" she asked, leaning forward in her seat. "See what?" Ryan asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "Those lights," she said, pointing out the back window. I turned around, squinting into the darkness. At first, I didn't see anything, just the faint outline of trees against the night sky. Then, there they were. 2 small, faint orbs of light. They looked like headlights, but they were too far apart, too dim, and they weren't following the road. They were moving through the trees. Ryan frowned. "It's probably just someone with a flashlight." "Out here?" Caleb asked, his voice tight. "We haven't seen a car or house in hours." Ryan didn't respond. Neither did I, because I was watching the lights, and they were getting closer. We tried to brush it off, but the tension in the car was palpable. Mia kept glancing over her shoulder, her fingers gripping the edge of her seat. Caleb leaned forward, his face pale in the dim glow of the dashboard. "Should we stop?" Mia asked finally. "No way," Ryan said. "We're not stopping in the middle of nowhere." I nodded, my throat dry. "Let's just keep going. It's probably nothing." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The lights didn't disappear. If anything, they got brighter. They were closer now, weaving through the trees like they were alive. "Are they following us?" Mia asked. No one answered, because we all knew the truth. They were. Ryan pressed his foot harder on the gas. The engine roared as we sped down the highway, the tires skimming the edge of the winding road. The lights followed. We watched, frozen, as they kept pace with the car, gliding effortlessly between the trees. And then they did something that made my blood run cold. They merged. The 2 lights became one, growing brighter and brighter until they were almost blinding. Then they shot forward, straight onto the road in front of us. Ryan slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, and the car lurched violently, sending us all tumbling against our seats. The light hovered there for a moment, pulsating like it was alive. Then it disappeared. We sat there in stunned silence, the only sound the rapid beating of my heart. "What the hell was that?" Caleb whispered. No one answered. Ryan's hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Mia was shaking, her eyes wide and glassy. "We need to get out of here," Ryan said finally, his voice hoarse. He threw the car into gear and hit the gas. The rest of the drive was a blur. The road seemed longer than it should have been, stretching endlessly into the darkness. Every so often, I thought I saw something. Shadows flickering at the edges of the headlights, faint glimmers of light in the trees. But I told myself it was just my imagination. We didn't stop until we reached the campsite. We were too shaken to set up the tent, so we slept in the car. Or at least we tried to. I kept waking up, convinced I could hear something outside. A faint humming sound, like electricity buzzing through power lines. But there were no power lines, just trees and darkness. The next morning, we didn't say much. No one wanted to talk about what we had seen, or what we thought we had seen. We packed up and left the campsite as quickly as we could, taking a different route back home. But even now, years later, I can't drive down a dark road without thinking about those lights. And I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if we had stopped? Or worse, if we hadn't been fast enough to get away? Because some things on the road aren't meant to be followed, and some lights aren't headlights. Driving long distances at night can be exhausting. The road stretches endlessly, the darkness pressing in from both sides, and the only company you have is the hum of the engine and the occasional distant headlights of another traveler. For most of my life, I enjoyed night drives. They gave me peace, until the night I made the mistake of stopping for a stranded stranger. I still regret pulling over, because I don't think that man was human. It was early fall, and I was making a late-night drive through a rural stretch of highway, cutting through thick forests and open fields. I had been driving for hours, and aside from the occasional passing truck, the road was empty. The only light came from my high beams, carving through the blackness. That's when I saw it. A car on the side of the road, hazards blinking weakly, and standing beside it, a man. He was just a silhouette at first, backlit by my approaching headlights. Tall, thin, standing too still. As I got closer, I saw that he was dressed oddly, wearing an old-fashioned suit that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. His clothes were dusty, wrinkled, like he had been out there for hours. He raised one hand in a slow, deliberate motion, signaling for help. Normally, I don't stop for hitchhikers, but this wasn't a hitchhiker. This was a stranded driver. I hesitated for only a second before pulling onto the shoulder. I wish I hadn't. The moment I stopped, something felt wrong. The air inside my car suddenly felt heavier, like I had just stepped into a room where something awful had happened. Still, I rolled down my window slightly, keeping my foot on the brake. Car trouble? I asked. The man took a slow step toward my window. Too slow, like he wasn't used to walking. Up close, I could see him more clearly. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes. There was something off about his eyes. Too dark, too deep, and the way he looked at me, not like a person asking for help, more like something hungry. "My car," he said, his voice smooth and old-fashioned. "It's broken." Something about the way he said it made my stomach turn, like he wasn't used to speaking, like he had practiced saying those words, but didn't fully understand them. I swallowed hard. "I can call someone for you." He took another step closer. "No need," he said. "I just need a ride." Every instinct in my body screamed no. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Where to?" His lips curved into a small, wrong smile. "Anywhere," he said. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I glanced past him at his car. The hood wasn't open. The tires weren't flat. In fact, there was nothing wrong with it. That's when I noticed something else. The license plate. It was completely blank. No numbers. No letters. Just an empty metal plate. My pulse quickened. I turned back to him, my mouth dry. His smile was gone now, replaced by something worse. An expression of expectation, like he was waiting for me to do something, waiting for me to open the door, waiting for me to let him in. I swallowed hard. "Sorry, I can't help you." His face didn't change, but his eyes did. They darkened, deepened, and I swear to God, for a split second, I saw something moving inside them. Then he did something that made my blood turn to ice. He leaned down, not like a normal person, not gradually, just suddenly, his face level with my window, like something had pulled him down instantly, and he was smiling again, a slow, stretched smile that didn't reach his eyes. He placed one hand on my car door. His fingers were too long. His nails looked wrong, too thick, almost like claws. "You should let me in," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. I didn't answer. I just hit the gas. My tires screeched against the pavement, and my car lurched forward. I didn't look back, didn't slow down. I just drove, heart pounding, hands shaking. Something in me screamed not to look in the rearview mirror, but I did, and I wish I hadn't. He was standing in the middle of the road, not chasing me, not reacting at all, just standing perfectly still, watching, waiting, and then the brake lights on his car turned off. His car, the one that was supposedly broken down, started on its own, and as I watched in growing horror, the headlights came on, and the car pulled back onto the road. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my car as fast as it would go. The highway stretched out before me, nothing but darkness and painted lines. And behind me, the car followed. Not close, not trying to catch up, just following, keeping its distance. For the next 10 minutes, my heart never slowed. The car never changed pace. It just stayed there, a constant, looming presence in my mirror. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it turned off the road. No signal, no hesitation. It just veered off and disappeared into the woods. I didn't stop driving until I saw the lights of a gas station up ahead. I pulled in, parked, and just sat there, gripping the wheel, trying to calm my breathing. The clerk inside must have seen how shaken I was because he came outside. "You okay?" he asked. I almost laughed. "No," I said. "Not really." I told him about the man, about the car. I didn't expect him to believe me, but he didn't laugh, didn't tell me I was crazy. He just nodded slowly and said, "You're lucky you didn't let him in." His words made my stomach turn. I swallowed hard. "Why?" He sighed, looking out toward the empty highway. "Because," he said, "not everyone who does gets the chance to tell the story." I never drove that highway again, and I never, ever, stopped for stranded drivers, because sometimes they aren't stranded at all. There's something unsettling about driving alone at night. The way the road stretches endlessly ahead, swallowed by darkness. The way the headlights reveal only a fraction of what lurks beyond the edges. The way your own reflection in the windshield can start to feel like a stranger watching you. I used to love late-night drives, until the night something followed me home. I work late shifts at a bar just outside of town. It's not a bad gig, decent tips, friendly regulars, but the commute is a pain. Every night, I drive 30 miles through the countryside to get home. No streetlights, no houses, just a long, winding stretch of asphalt cutting through dense forest. Most nights, I don't mind it, but sometimes the isolation gets to me. That night, I remember feeling it more than usual. Like the road was too empty, like the trees were leaning in closer, like something was watching me. I checked the clock, 12:47 a.m. A long night, but nothing out of the ordinary. Or so I thought. The radio was acting up. Static crackled between stations, and no matter how many times I adjusted the dial, I couldn't get a clear signal. Eventually, I gave up, letting the silence settle around me. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a flicker of movement in the trees, just at the edge of my vision. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a coyote. But then I saw it again, not on the ground, in the trees. A shape, tall and thin, moving fast. It wasn't running through the woods. It was swinging, from branch to branch, like an animal, like a thing that shouldn't exist. A cold wave of dread crawled up my spine. I tightened my grip on the wheel. My heart picked up speed. It had to be a trick of the light. My headlights catching a bird. Maybe, but then it got closer. I risked another glance. The shape was keeping pace with my car. No, not just keeping pace. It was getting ahead of me. The headlights hit it full on for the first time, and my breath caught in my throat. It was wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its arms stretched unnaturally long, its limbs moving in sharp, jerky motions. And its face, it didn't have one, just a smooth, featureless surface, as if someone had erased its identity completely. But somehow, I knew it was watching me. I pressed harder on the gas. 60, 65, 70 miles per hour. The wind roared against the windows. The trees blurred past in streaks of black, and still it kept up. Then, without warning, it leaped, not onto my car, ahead of me, straight into the road. For one horrifying second, I saw it standing there, illuminated in my high beams. Its arms were too long, its body too thin. Its fingers twitched, like it was waiting for me to get closer. Then, it was gone, vanished, like it had never been there at all. I slammed on the brakes, the tires skidding against the asphalt. My hands were shaking. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road behind me was empty. Just miles of darkness. My breathing was loud in the silence. I could hear my heart hammering in my ears. I reached for my phone to check for service. No signal. My stomach twisted into knots. I needed to get out of here. I needed to go home. I sat there for a long moment, trying to calm down, trying to convince myself that I was just tired, that I had imagined it, that it was just a trick of my exhausted mind. But then I saw the handprint, pressed against the outside of my driver's side window. Long, smudged, too high up for a person, and too thin to be human. I hit the gas so hard my tires screeched. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I just drove, faster than I ever had before. The lights of my town never looked so beautiful as they did when they finally appeared on the horizon. I pulled into my driveway, jumped out of the car, and ran inside, locking every door and window behind me. Only then did I breathe. Only then did I let myself think. What the hell had I just seen? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it, swinging through the trees, watching me, waiting. I told myself I was just overtired, that maybe it had been a trick of the headlights. That's what I kept telling myself, until the next morning. When I stepped outside, I froze. There, on the hood of my car, was another handprint, the same long, smudged print, and next to it, something small, something black, a single, brittle twig, almost like something had been climbing on my car, like something had been watching me while I slept. A chill ran down my spine. I scanned the tree line at the edge of my property. Nothing moved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still there, watching, waiting. I never took that road at night again, and now, whenever I drive past the forest, I keep my eyes straight ahead. Because I know, if I look into the trees, something might look back. Long road trips at night have a strange way of making you feel isolated. There's something unsettling about driving for hours with nothing but darkness stretching endlessly ahead, the occasional flicker of headlights behind you, and the eerie silence that settles between each passing mile. I never thought I had a reason to be scared, until the night I stopped at the wrong rest stop. I was on my way home from a weekend trip to visit my sister. The drive was supposed to take about 6 hours, but after a few unexpected detours, it was closer to 7. I was exhausted. The kind of exhaustion where your eyes feel heavy, your body feels sluggish, and every passing mile starts blending into the next. By the time I saw the rest stop sign, I knew I had to pull over. I just needed a minute, a quick stretch, a bathroom break, maybe a splash of cold water on my face. So, I took the exit. The place was almost deserted. A single vending machine flickered near the entrance of a dimly lit building. The neon lights buzzed faintly, casting long shadows over the pavement. There were only 2 cars in the parking lot. One was parked near the vending machines, and the other was sitting farther back, its engine off, its interior completely dark. Something about it made me uneasy, but I told myself I was just tired. I parked near the entrance, leaving my car running. Just in and out. 2 minutes. That was all I needed. The second I stepped inside, I regretted it. The air was stale, thick with the scent of mildew and something else. Something metallic. The walls were lined with outdated posters about missing persons, their faces faded and curled at the edges. The lights overhead buzzed, flickering every few seconds, and it was completely empty, or at least, that's what I thought at first. As I walked past the mirrors, something caught my eye. A figure, standing near the stalls. I froze. A tall man, dressed in dark clothes, stood perfectly still, his face partially hidden in shadow. He wasn't using the restroom. He wasn't washing his hands. He was just standing there, watching, waiting. My instincts screamed at me to leave, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. Maybe he was just another traveler. Maybe I was overreacting. I forced myself to keep walking, pretending not to notice him. I pushed open the stall door, locked it, and took a deep breath. I just needed a moment, just a few seconds to collect myself. Then, a footstep, soft, slow, right outside the stall door. My heart pounded. I stared at the thin gap beneath the stall, watching as a shadow shifted outside. I held my breath. Silence. Then, another step, closer, I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking as I tried to check my signal. No service. My stomach dropped. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat there, my body frozen in fear. Then, the light above my stall flickered, and in that split second, I saw it. His boots, standing right outside my stall. I clenched my fists, my pulse racing. Whoever he was, he wasn't just passing through. He was waiting. For me. I had to think. Had to get out. But how? Then, a sound. A sharp metallic click. Like a blade being unfolded. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just paranoia. This was real. I was trapped. And he was waiting for me to make the first move. I had no choice. I had to run. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Then, in one quick motion, I kicked the door open as hard as I could. It slammed against something. Him? I heard a grunt, a staggering step backward. I didn't wait, didn't think. I just ran. My feet pounded against the tile as I sprinted for the exit. Behind me, heavy footsteps. Fast. Coming after me. I burst through the door, nearly slipping on the pavement. I fumbled for my car handle, ripping the door open and throwing myself inside. Just as I hit the lock button, a hand slammed against my window. I screamed. A face, partially hidden by the darkness, was pressed against the glass. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them, watching me, studying me. He tried the handle, pulled, then he smiled. I slammed the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement. The figure didn't move, just stood there, grinning, as I sped away. I didn't look back, didn't slow down. Not until I was miles down the road, heart racing, breath shaking. It took me hours to calm down, even longer to convince myself I was really safe. When I got home, I checked the news. There was nothing. No reports. No missing people. Nothing about a man lurking in a rest stop. Like he had never existed. But I knew the truth. Because later that night, when I checked my car, I found a deep scratch along my door handle. A scratch that looked like it had been made by a knife. I don't stop at rest stops anymore. Because I know, some people aren't just passing through. Some people are waiting. And if I had stayed just a little longer, I might not have left at all. Night driving has never bothered me. I actually prefer it. Fewer cars, cooler air, and a kind of peaceful solitude you don't get during the day. But one night, that solitude nearly cost me my life. Because I made the mistake of picking up a hitchhiker, and he was playing a very different game than I was. It was late, maybe 1 a.m., when I first saw him. I was heading home after visiting my sister in a city 2 states over. The highway stretched endlessly before me, a long ribbon of empty road with nothing but the occasional pair of headlights passing in the other direction. Then, in the distance, I saw a figure walking along the shoulder. At first, I thought he was just some guy whose car had broken down. But as I got closer, I saw no car. Just him. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes. His thumbs stuck out lazily, as if he wasn't even trying very hard to get a ride. And for some reason, I slowed down. I don't normally pick up hitchhikers. It's just common sense these days. But something about him felt off. Not threatening, exactly. Just wrong. Like he wasn't supposed to be there. The moment my headlights hit him, he turned his head, too quickly, and locked eyes with me. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe I felt guilty. Maybe I was just too tired to think straight. But before I could stop myself, I pulled over. He climbed in without hesitation. "Thanks," he said, shutting the door. His voice was flat, emotionless. I nodded. "Where are you headed?" "Wherever you're going," he said. I gripped the wheel a little tighter. Up close, I could see him more clearly. His face was gaunt, his skin stretched too tight over his cheekbones. He had dark eyes, too dark, and short cropped hair that looked like it had been shaved and left to grow for a week or two. His clothes were normal enough, black jeans, a faded green military jacket. But something about him felt old, not in age, just in presence. Like he'd been on the road for much, much longer than I realized. I swallowed hard and focused on driving. For the first few minutes, we sat in silence. Then he started talking. About war. About violence. About death. You ever see a guy die before? He asked suddenly. I blinked. No. He nodded slowly, like he had expected that answer. I have. I forced a chuckle, trying to shake the tension creeping into my gut. That's so? Yeah, he said, staring straight ahead. Then, I made sure of it. A chill ran down my spine. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was smiling now, just a little. Something about that half smile, something about the way he had been waiting for me to ask, made my stomach twist. I needed to get this guy out of my car. Now. So, I said carefully, what do you do? He tilted his head slightly, as if he found my question amusing. I hunt. For what? People. The way he said it, so casual, so relaxed, sent a bolt of fear through my chest. I forced another laugh, gripping the wheel tighter. You're messing with me, right? No answer. He just reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a gun. I felt my throat go dry. Relax, he murmured. I'm not gonna shoot you. Then, slowly, he opened the cylinder, spun it. I swallowed hard. Ever played Russian roulette? He asked. My hands were sweating now. Can't say I have. His smile widened. Wanna learn? I knew I was in trouble, knew I needed to get away. But how? I couldn't just slam on the brakes. If he panicked, he could shoot me on instinct. I needed to be smart, needed to play along. So I forced a smile and nodded. Sure. He looked pleased. He spun the cylinder again, then snapped it shut with a sharp click. 6 chambers, he murmured. 1 bullet. He raised the gun to his own temple. My breath caught in my throat. He pulled the trigger. Click. Nothing. He let out a slow, content sigh. Then he turned the gun toward me. My entire body went numb. He smiled. Your turn. I had seconds to act. If I refused, he'd probably shoot me. If I played, I might still get shot. I needed a distraction. Fast. I glanced at the glove compartment, then at the dashboard, and suddenly, I had an idea. I forced another smile. Let me see it first, I said. He frowned. I just want to feel the weight, I added quickly. I've never held one before. For a moment, he just stared at me. Then, he handed it over. The second my fingers touched the gun, I acted. I grabbed the steering wheel and jerked it hard to the right. The car veered off the road, tires screeching. The hitchhiker yelled, slamming into the door. The second we hit the shoulder, I threw the car into park. Then, without hesitation, I grabbed the gun and hit him in the face with it. Hard. He let out a grunt of pain, clutching his head. I didn't wait, didn't hesitate. I kicked the door open and bolted. I ran into the darkness, branches slashing at my arms, lungs burning. I ran until my legs gave out. Then I collapsed, gasping for breath, listening, waiting. But I never heard footsteps behind me. He hadn't followed me. By the time I got back to the road, he was gone. The car was still there, the keys still in the ignition, but the passenger door was wide open. And the gun? Vanished, like he had never been there at all. I never picked up a hitchhiker again, because some people aren't looking for a ride. Some people are looking for a victim. Late-night food stops have always been part of my routine. After working long shifts, I'd pull into some quiet roadside spot, grab something greasy and hot, and eat in the silence of an empty parking lot. It was a small ritual, one that made the exhaustion a little more bearable. But one night, I stopped at a taco truck I'd been to dozens of times. And the man who ran it? He was gone. And something else was there instead. I worked nights unloading freight, long shifts that left me drained and starving. The only good part? The taco truck that parked just off the highway, right near an old, half-abandoned gas station. I'd been going there for years. The guy who ran it, Jorge, was always there, grilling up the best tacos I'd ever had. Didn't matter if it was freezing, pouring rain, or the dead of night. Jorge was always there. But that night, something was wrong. I pulled into the parking lot at 2:12 a.m., the time glowing dimly on my dashboard. The truck was there, just like always. But there were no customers, no Jorge, and yet, the grill was still on. I frowned, stepping out of my car. The air smelled like burning meat. The neon sign on the truck flickered faintly, buzzing in the quiet. "Jorge," I called. Nothing. The place was too still, like the world had stopped breathing. I stepped closer. The scent of burned meat grew stronger. Then I noticed it. A burned handprint, seared into the metal of the grill. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just burned on. It looked like someone had pressed their hand against the grill and left it there. Too long. Long enough for the skin to stick. I scanned the area, suddenly on edge. Still no Jorge. Still no sign of anyone at all. The only sound was the hissing of meat burning on the grill, curling into charred, blackened bits. That's when I noticed the cash register. It was wide open. A few crumpled bills sat inside, untouched, like someone had been in the middle of a transaction and just disappeared. I turned in a slow circle, my heart starting to hammer. Something felt wrong. The kind of wrong that settles in your bones before your brain catches up. Then, a sound. A soft rustling behind the truck. I turned fast. "Jorge." Silence. Then, a shadow moved, just beyond the edge of the lot. Something tall, something thin, watching me. I took a step back, my breath hitching. The air felt different now, like the second before a storm hits, too still, too heavy. I turned back to the truck. I just needed to grab my food and go. Something, anything, to prove this was still normal. I reached for a taco sitting on the counter, my fingers shaking. Then I noticed the plate. It wasn't Jorge's usual plates. It was wooden. I stopped, stared. The edges of the plate were charred black, like it had been burned, like it had been here for a long time. Longer than Jorge, longer than the truck itself. I felt sick. I turned toward my car, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I just needed to leave. Now, then. A whisper, right behind me. Low, hissing, something not quite human. I didn't think. I didn't look. I just ran. I threw myself into my car, my hands shaking violently as I jammed the key into the ignition. The headlights flashed on, illuminating the parking lot. It was empty. The truck was still there, still running. But Jorge? Gone. And in his place, a shadow standing just beyond the light, watching, waiting. I slammed the car into reverse, tires screeching as I sped out of the lot. I didn't stop, didn't look back. Not until I was miles away, my breath coming in gasps. I drove straight home, locked every door behind me, and sat on the floor trying to breathe, trying to tell myself I hadn't just seen what I'd seen. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that burned handprint, that wooden plate, and I wondered, had Jorge been the first? Or had that food truck been feeding people for far longer than anyone realized? The next morning, I checked the news. Nothing. No reports. No missing persons. No mention of Jorge at all. Like he had never existed. Like the taco truck had just been there for no reason at all. I drove past the gas station later that day. And the truck? Gone. No trace of it. No sign that it had ever been there. But I know what I saw. I still dream about it. And sometimes, when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I smell burning meat. I tell myself it's my imagination, that Jorge's still out there somewhere. But deep down, I know the truth, because I've been back to that gas station 100 times. And not once, has another food truck ever parked there again. There's a certain kind of comfort in seeing flashing blue and red lights in your rearview mirror. A cop pulling you over is annoying, sure, but at least you know you're dealing with someone who's supposed to protect people. At least, that's what I used to think. Until the night I got pulled over by a man who wasn't a cop at all. It was past 2 a.m., and I was heading home after a late DJ gig. The venue was out in the middle of nowhere, some tiny town along a quiet stretch of highway. I had been driving for about an hour, barely seeing any cars on the road, just empty darkness stretching for miles. The only sound was the low hum of my engine and the faint ringing in my ears from hours of loud music. I was exhausted. Just a few more miles, and I'd be home. Then, flashing lights filled my mirror. Red and blue strobes flickered against the trees, washing the road in pulses of color. A police motorcycle. My stomach dropped. I wasn't speeding. I had been on cruise control the whole time, but I signaled and pulled over, watching as the motorcycle came to a slow stop behind me. The officer sat there for a moment, unmoving, the flashing lights casting strange shadows around him. Then, finally, he got off the bike. And the second he did, something felt wrong. His uniform didn't look right. The pants were normal, the standard dark navy color. But his boots? They were wrong. Not police issued, just regular black work boots. And his badge, it was too dull, almost plastic looking. Something in my gut twisted. I kept my hands on the wheel, my pulse quickening. Something was off. And when he finally reached my window, I knew I was in serious trouble. He leaned down slowly. His face was strange, too still, too expressionless. His eyes looked empty, like he was playing a role he didn't quite understand. I forced a nervous smile. "Evening, officer." He didn't respond, didn't even blink, just stared at me. Then, finally, in a slow, almost rehearsed voice, he said, "License and registration." I hesitated. I didn't want to roll down my window, didn't want to let him get any closer. Instead, I held up my license through the glass. "Can I ask what this is about?" His expression didn't change. He didn't even glance at my license. He just stood there, waiting, like he was expecting something else. Then I saw it. His hands. They were wrong. The fingers were too long, the skin too pale, almost grayish in the flashing lights. And when he finally did move, he reached for something at his waist. A gun. I panicked. My fight or flight instincts kicked in so fast I barely had time to think. I threw the car into drive and slammed my foot on the gas. My tires screeched against the pavement. The officer, or whatever the hell he was, lunged for my door handle. For a split second, I saw his face twist into something inhuman. Then, he pulled out his gun and fired. A sharp pop cracked through the air. I heard something was past my head, shattering my side mirror. I kept driving. Faster, faster. My hands shook on the wheel as I fought to stay on the road. The flashing lights behind me didn't disappear. I saw him get back on the motorcycle, saw him coming after me. I swerved onto the next exit, my heart hammering. I had no plan, no idea where I was going, just had to get away. But then, the flashing lights vanished. I glanced at my rearview mirror. The motorcycle was gone, like it had never been there. I didn't slow down, not until I reached a gas station, its bright neon lights flickering in the night. I pulled in fast, nearly skidding to a stop. My breath was shaky, my hands still gripping the wheel like I was afraid to let go. I scanned the road behind me. Nothing. No sign of the motorcycle. No sign of the fake cop. I jumped out and ran inside, my pulse pounding. The clerk, a guy in his 40s with tired eyes, looked up as I burst through the door. "You all right?" he asked. I took a second to catch my breath, then blurted out, "I just got pulled over by a guy who wasn't a cop." His expression changed instantly. He stared at me, then at my car, then back at me. What did he look like? I described everything. The weird uniform, the too long fingers, the emptiness in his eyes. And when I was done, the clerk just stood there, silent, like he had heard this before. After a long moment, he said, "You need to go home. Right now." I swallowed hard. Who was that? He shook his head. Not a cop. Then what? His jaw tightened. "People go missing out here," he said finally. "Late at night. Always the same story." I felt a cold chill crawl up my spine. "How many?" I whispered. The clerk's eyes darkened. "Too many." I left that gas station without another word. I didn't stop driving until I was safely home, locked in my apartment, shaking in bed. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that face, that empty expression, and I kept wondering, what would have happened if I had rolled down my window? What would have happened if I had played along? What if that bullet had been just an inch closer? They never found the man, or the motorcycle, or the bullet casing from the shot he fired, like he had never existed at all, like it had been some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. But I know what I saw, and now, whenever I see flashing lights in my mirror at night, I feel my stomach drop, because sometimes, it's not a cop pulling you over, and sometimes, You're never meant to leave that highway alive. Night driving used to be peaceful. There's something calming about an empty road, the hum of the engine, the rhythm of the white lines flicking past. I never used to worry about who or what might be lurking out there. Not until the night I nearly fell into a trap. Not until I saw the man lying in the road. It was past midnight, and I was heading home after a long shift. The highway was completely deserted. No cars ahead, none behind. Just miles of open road stretching into the darkness. I was tired. My eyes burned, and my body ached from standing all day. I kept the radio low, just enough noise to keep me from nodding off. Then I saw it. A man lying in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly before coming to a stop just a few feet away from his body. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel. For a moment, I just stared. He wasn't moving. Not even a twitch. A terrible thought crept into my mind. What if he was dead? I reached for my phone to call 911. Then I saw it. Something shifted in the tree line. A shadow. No, two shadows. Moving toward the road. Moving toward me. My stomach twisted into a tight knot of fear. This wasn't an accident. This was a setup. My pulse hammered as I realized what was happening. They were waiting. Hiding in the trees. Waiting for me to get out. Waiting for me to check on the body. I glanced at the man lying in the road. Still no movement. But suddenly, I wasn't so sure he was unconscious. Suddenly, I felt like he was listening. Waiting. I imagined the second I bent down to check for a pulse, he'd spring up. The men in the trees would rush me. I'd be outnumbered. Overpowered. Trapped. I needed to leave. Now. My hands were shaking as I threw the car into reverse, my headlights flashing over the trees. And that's when I saw it. The unconscious man moved. Just a little. Not a twitch. Not a jerk. Just a small, calculated shift. Like he was preparing to spring up. I could feel it. He was getting ready to grab me, to drag me down. Panic shot through me like ice. My foot slammed onto the gas. The car lurched backward, tires screeching against the pavement. And in that split second, the man in the road moved fast. Too fast. Like he had been faking the whole time. Like a trap had just been triggered. His hand shot forward, grabbing at the air, trying to reach my door handle. I heard shouting. I saw the two men in the trees running toward me. They had masks on. One of them was holding something. A crowbar. The glint of metal flashed in the headlights. I knew what was about to happen. They were going to smash my window in, drag me out, do whatever they had planned. I had seconds to act. Seconds before they got me. I floored it. The tires spun, the engine roared, and I tore backward down the highway. The man in the road lunged, his fingers grazing the side of my car as I sped away. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I kept going. I didn't look back. Not until I was sure I was far enough away. Not until I knew I was safe. I finally pulled over a few miles down the road, hands shaking violently. I forced myself to breathe, to think. I had almost fallen for it. If I had gotten out, if I had checked on him, I wouldn't be here right now. I would have been just another missing person. Another name on a news report. Another face on a flyer. I called 911, my voice unsteady as I told them everything. They sent officers to the scene immediately, but when they got there, the road was empty. No body, no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. Like it had never happened. Like they had vanished into the night. I tried to explain, but I could tell they didn't fully believe me. Still, the cop gave me a serious look before I left. He told me, in a quiet voice, that I wasn't the first to report something like this. That people had gone missing on that stretch of road before. People who stopped when they saw someone in the road. People who were never seen again. I swallowed hard. So what do I do? The cop's expression darkened. If you ever see something like that again, he said, keep driving. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that man in the road. His body, perfectly still. His fingers, twitching. The moment he moved. The moment I knew it was a trap. And I kept wondering, what if I had stopped just a little bit closer? Would I have even made it back to my car? Would I have ever left that highway at all? I don't take that highway anymore, and if I ever see someone lying in the road again, I won't stop, because some people aren't victims. Some people are waiting for you to get close. Some people are hunters, and the second you let your guard down, they make sure you never leave. Driving long stretches of highway at night can do strange things to a person. The hum of the engine, the monotonous lines on the asphalt, and the endless darkness have a way of blurring reality. For truckers like me, it's just part of the job. You get used to the loneliness, the quiet, and the tricks your mind plays on you after hours behind the wheel. But nothing could have prepared me for that night. It was mid-December, and I was hauling a load through one of the loneliest stretches of desert highway in the southwest. The route was isolated, with miles of empty road and nothing but scrubland and distant mountains to break the horizon. The cold was biting, even with the heater blasting. A low fog clung to the road, illuminated in the glow of my high beams. I was halfway through my shift, and the radio wasn't doing much to keep me awake. Static drowned out most of the stations, and the only ones that came through clearly were playing old country songs that felt as lonely as the road itself. Then I saw him. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. A figure appeared in the distance, standing just off the shoulder of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a man. He was standing perfectly still, his thumb extended in the universal hitchhiker's gesture. Normally, I wouldn't stop for a hitchhiker. Too many risks, too many horror stories. But something about this guy felt off. He wasn't wearing a coat, just a faded flannel shirt and jeans, despite the freezing temperatures. His head was tilted down, his face hidden by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. I slowed down instinctively, the headlights washing over him. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just stood there, his thumb outstretched. Against my better judgment, I pulled over. The man climbed into the passenger seat without a word. "Cold night to be out here," I said, trying to break the silence. He didn't respond right away. I glanced at him out of the corner of my eye. He was tall and lean, with weathered skin that looked like it hadn't seen the sun in years. His hat cast a shadow over his face, but I could just make out his eyes, dark, unblinking, and strangely empty. "Thanks for stopping," he said finally. His voice was low and gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in a long time. "No problem," I said, forcing a smile. "Where are you headed?" He didn't answer, just stared straight ahead. The silence stretched uncomfortably as the truck rumbled down the highway. "So, what were you doing out there?" I asked, hoping to fill the void. "Waiting," he said. "For what?" He turned his head slowly, his dark eyes meeting mine. "For you." A chill ran down my spine. I laughed nervously, trying to shake the feeling. "Well, lucky me, huh?" He didn't smile. The longer he sat there, the heavier the air in the cab seemed to get. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His clothes were too clean for someone who'd been hitchhiking. His hands were pale, almost bloodless, and he didn't seem affected by the cold. And then there was the way he stared, unblinking, like he was watching something just beyond me. About 10 miles down the road, he finally spoke again. "You shouldn't have stopped," he said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. I decided I'd had enough. "Look, I don't usually pick up hitchhikers," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I can drop you off at the next gas station, but that's as far as I'm going." He turned to look at me again, his eyes darker than the night outside. "There's no gas station," he said. I blinked. "What are you talking about?" "There's one about 20 miles up the road." "No," he said softly, "there isn't." The unease that had been simmering in my chest exploded into full-blown fear. I reached for the radio, hoping the sound of a voice, any voice, would calm me down. Static. Every station was nothing but static. My hand tightened on the wheel. What the hell is going on? He didn't answer. The fog outside had thickened, swallowing the road. The truck's headlights barely pierced the darkness now, and the familiar white lines on the asphalt had disappeared. I checked the GPS on the dashboard. The screen was blank, just an empty grid where the map should have been. My pulse quickened. "Where are we?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "You're on the wrong road," he said calmly. I slammed on the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop, the tires screeching against the pavement. I turned to him, my hands trembling. "Get out," I said. He didn't move. I said, "Get out." He tilted his head, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You invited me in," he said. I reached for the door handle, ready to throw him out myself, but the handle wouldn't budge. None of the locks worked, and the air in the cab had grown unbearably cold, my breath fogging up the windshield. "You shouldn't have stopped," he said again, his voice barely a whisper. The fog outside seemed to press against the windows, as if it was alive. Shapes moved within it, shadows shifting and swirling, impossible to make out. I felt trapped, claustrophobic. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, shouting at him, "What do you want from me?" He didn't answer. He just smiled, and then he was gone. The passenger seat was empty. The air in the cab warmed instantly, and I gasped for breath, my chest heaving. The fog outside had cleared, and the road stretched out in front of me, empty and quiet. But when I looked at the seat beside me, there was a single black feather resting on the cushion. I never drove that route again, and I never pick up hitchhikers, because some things on the highway aren't looking for a ride. They're looking for you. Driving at night is something I've always enjoyed. The quiet roads, the hum of the engine, and the solitude give me time to think. But after what happened that one night, I've never looked at late-night drives the same way. It was the kind of encounter that leaves you questioning reality, something that still haunts me years later. I was on my way back home after visiting my parents. It was a 3-hour drive, mostly along quiet country roads. The kind of route where the only signs of life are the occasional farmhouse or distant porch light. The sky was clear, the moon full, and the road stretched endlessly before me. My headlights carved through the darkness, illuminating the narrow path ahead. The trees on either side cast long, skeletal shadows that flickered and danced as I drove. The radio wasn't picking up any stations, so I was left alone with my thoughts and the sound of the tires on the asphalt. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought she was a deer, a shape in the distance, just off the shoulder of the road. As I got closer, I realized it was a woman. She was walking alone, barefoot, wearing a thin white dress that clung to her in the night air. Her long, dark hair hung loose, obscuring her face. She didn't look up as my car approached, didn't turn to acknowledge the headlights, just kept walking, slowly, like she had nowhere to be. Something about her felt wrong. I slowed down as I passed her, my heart beating faster. Her dress was torn, dirty, like she had been out there for hours or longer. Her steps were uneven, almost robotic, and she kept her head down, her hair hiding her face. I pulled over a few yards ahead, my tires crunching on the gravel shoulder. Rolling down the window, I called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" She didn't respond. She just kept walking, her steps steady and unchanging. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the door handle. Every instinct told me to stay in the car, but I couldn't just leave her out there. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, stepping out into the cold night air. The sound of the wind rustling through the trees was the only thing I could hear as I approached her. "Miss?" I called again, keeping a safe distance. "Are you hurt? Do you need a ride somewhere?" She stopped. Her back was still to me, her hair swaying gently in the breeze. For a moment, I thought she was going to turn around, but she just stood there, perfectly still. "Miss?" I said again, my voice trembling now. No response, just silence. And then, she started walking again. Something about her movements sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't just the way she walked. It was the way she didn't seem to care about me, about the car, about anything. Like she wasn't entirely there. I watched her for a moment longer, my breath fogging in the cold air. And then she stopped again. This time, she turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see the edge of her profile. Her skin was pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. But her eyes were wrong. They weren't looking at me. They weren't looking at anything. They were just empty. My chest tightened, and I stumbled back toward the car, fumbling with the door handle. I didn't wait to see what she did next. I just got in, slammed the door, and drove. The adrenaline surged through me as I sped down the road, the headlights cutting through the darkness. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something about her wasn't natural. And the thought that kept running through my head was, why was she out there? A few miles later, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was empty. No sign of her. I let out a shaky breath, gripping the wheel tighter. But then, I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by my brake lights. Her head was tilted slightly, her hair still hiding her face. I gasped, my hands trembling as I hit the gas. My car surged forward, the tires squealing as I sped away. But no matter how fast I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, watching me, following me, waiting. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a long moment, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The night was silent, the only sound the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. But I couldn't bring myself to get out. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her standing there, watching me from the shadows. Eventually, I mustered the courage to step out and rush to the door. I locked it behind me, bolted the windows, and sat in the living room with every light in the house on. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Who was she? What was she doing out there? And why did she look at me like that? I decided to do some digging. A quick search online revealed something that made my blood run cold. Years ago, a woman had been hit by a car on that stretch of road. The driver never stopped. She had been walking alone, trying to get help after her car broke down, and she never made it. People said her spirit still wandered the road, searching for someone to stop. But anyone who did never saw her again. I don't drive that road anymore, and if I ever see someone walking along the highway at night, I don't stop, because some people aren't looking for help. They're looking for something else.